Ever walked into a room that just felt right, but you couldn't pinpoint why? I'm sure you love your stuff, and you should. If you're anything like me, you've spent years collecting the objects that make your home yours, and individually, these pieces are great. So why is it that when you put them all together, your home just ends up looking like a chaotic jumble of stuff? It's the #1 struggle I hear from people who are just trying to create a home that feels personal and unique. But don't worry, you're not doing it wrong. You're just missing one crucial piece of the puzzle. This isn't about getting rid of things you love or starting from scratch. It's about learning the secret to making them all play nicely together. Today, we're going to pinpoint the single biggest mistake most of us make when designing an eclectic home. More importantly, I'm going to share a simple, game-changing fix that will help you get that balanced and intentional look you've been dreaming of, so you can turn that chaos into cohesion. And I promise, it's easier than you think. First of all, what is eclectic design? Well, to properly answer that question, let's start with what it isn't. Eclectic design is often misunderstood as an anything-goes approach, but in reality, it's a highly curated practice of mixing elements from different time periods, styles, and cultures to create a space that feels cohesive despite its diversity. Most importantly to me, it celebrates individuality and storytelling, and my main mission here is to inspire you to design and create something personal, to go beyond mimicking what everyone else is doing and find your inner design voice. Like any art form, the best work is always the most personal. Also, I think more and more of us are leaning towards a more eclectic home because our lives are so much more expansive than they were in previous generations. The world is opening up, and our influences are expanding. We now have access to so many different influences, and in a world of infinite choices, it can be really hard to choose just one style to go with. Now, before we get into the real culprit, let's talk about a few red herrings, the things you maybe think are the problem. First, you might assume you're mixing too many design styles, but mixing styles is eclectic design. That's the whole point. Sure, some styles are trickier to pair than others, but that blend is what makes a space feel dynamic and interesting. So if it's not the styles, maybe it's the patterns. Look, pattern mixing is definitely an art, and it can go wrong. But again, it's not the foundational mistake. A rich, layered interior is often packed with different patterns. So while clashing patterns can be a symptom, it's not the disease. It's just a clue that leads us to the real issue. These are what I call red herrings because they're what people try to fix, usually by toning everything down and ending up with a space that's just boring and void of any personality. The exact opposite of what you wanted. The real problem is much deeper, but thankfully so much easier to fix. So what is it? The #1 reason your eclectic home looks chaotic is a lack of a unifying element, what designers like to call a common thread. That's it. It's really that simple. Your pieces are all speaking different languages, and there's no translator in the room. Without that common thread, your eye doesn't know where to land, so it just bounces frantically from the bold rug to the quirky lamp to the gallery wall, never finding a place to rest. Your brain reads that visual chaos as clutter. This common thread is the secret sauce. It's the quiet, underlying story that connects everything, whispering to your brain that yes, this vintage armchair does belong with this modern sculpture. It's what turns a random assortment of stuff into a curated collection. To simplify, really, it's just repetition. All I'm trying to say is find a common theme in the pieces you have, and repeat that theme throughout the space. Repetition is what starts to make a space look intentional, and not randomly thrown together. So what can this thread be? It could be a recurring texture like natural woods weaving through the room. It could be a repeated shape like soft curves on your furniture and decor. But the easiest, most effective, and probably the most transformative common thread for anyone to master is color. A consistent color palette is the ultimate peacemaker in a room full of diverse styles. It's a unifying force that pulls everything together, making the whole space feel harmonious and complete. To help this start to sink in, I think it's really helpful to look at what the pros are doing and see if you can pinpoint what common threads are recurring throughout the space. As an example, let's take a look at this room designed by one of my all-time favorites, Beate Heyman. At first glance to the untrained eye, this room may seem like it lacks any sort of common thread. There's a couple of mid-century modern armchairs paired with an arts and crafts side table, some very traditional English kitchen cabinetry, ultra-modern light fixtures, and very natural and organic window treatments. It's a wacky, lovably unique mix of patterns and textures. I love what she's doing so much because it's so unique and fun. It's stimulating, interesting, inviting, and yet somehow still so elevated and refined. This is the work of a master designer, and while I'm nowhere near as brave or skilled as she is, studying her rule-defying work has given me courage to be at least a little braver in my own undertakings. So how does she make all these seemingly disjointed pieces sit harmoniously together? Let's take a look again at this room, but look carefully this time. Try and identify some common threads. Let's start with the most obvious, color. The one color that takes up the most real estate is actually white. The walls, the ceiling, the tile in the kitchen, even the upholstery on these armchairs all provide a nice base to start adding some more interesting shades onto. The next colors I see are blue and green. The sofa is a vibrant shade of blue accented by these green pillows. These candle holders in the back are a deep forest green. And the cabinetry in the kitchen is a more muted blue-green that, while uniquely its own shade, does sit in the same color family. Finally, like a cherry on top, she adds pops of vibrant red and reddish-orange to the palette. We see hints of it peeking out in this area rug and in the kitchen. There's also an ingenious pop of reddish-orange in the radiator and accent pillows. But it's not just color. There are common materials used as well. Notice the velvet fabric on the sofa and the pillows, the elegant linens that frame the windows and kitchen island, the wood of the floor, tables, chairs, and kitchen island. They all are different colors and patterns, but they find common ground in the material they're made of. By taking the time to study a space properly, you can hopefully start to see these common threads and understand how they work to harmonize a space that is filled with diversity. Hopefully this is helping to illuminate a way of thinking. And speaking of illuminating, on a personal note, Erin and I have been working for months on designing and making our own lamps, and we're very excited to finally be releasing them. Now that you're hopefully seeing the importance of repetition, how can you harmonize your own space if it's feeling a little too disjointed? First, find a piece that makes your heart sing. Ideally something with more than one color. It could be a piece of art, an area rug, a patterned sofa, even a small vase. Use this as your anchor. In this case, we're going to again start with color as your common thread because it's the easiest place to start and it's going to have the most impact on harmonizing a space. Let's imagine your anchor is a beautiful Turkish area rug. Obviously, the dominant color here is a deep and vibrant red, but there's also shades of blue, yellow, black, and even white in it. I'm using this piece on purpose because it's the area rug in our living room, and it is in fact my anchor piece that I'm building the whole room around. I have a minor obsession with good quality area rugs, and they're most often my starting point when coming up with a color palette for a space. A large area rug in the center of a room is inevitably going to take up a lot of visual space, so it works nicely as a sort of natural anchor. But again, you choose what you love, and make that your anchor. Once you've decided on this anchor, start pulling your color palette directly from this piece. This is the most critical step. You're using the colors from that one piece to create a rule book for the whole room. In my case, I have a lot to work with, and it's why I was drawn to this rug in the first place. There's a lot of different shades that will allow me to have a lot of fun with what I'm doing in this living room in the months ahead. Okay, now for the fun part, weaving that thread throughout the room to connect all the dots. Again, let's stick with talking about color here because it's the easiest to see and explain. Your mission now is to intentionally repeat the colors in your palette throughout the space. But which ones will be more dominant than others? Which colors do you want to use more sparingly? Now there's many different theories about color proportions, and no two designers will approach it exactly the same. Finding your personal expression is part of the fun, but what is most important is to understand the theory of balance. You can use as much of or as little of a color as you want, as long as the room feels balanced. Once you've chosen the colors from your anchor piece that will be the palette for your room, start thinking about which ones you want to feature more heavily than others, and separate the colors into 3 sections: dominant, secondary, and accent colors. It's always best practice to figure this out before you start painting walls and buying furniture, because it will ensure you maintain harmony once you get to work on actually building the room out. I personally find myself following the principle of 50-30-20. All that means is roughly 50% of the room utilizes my dominant color, 30% is my secondary colors, and 20% my accent colors. Perhaps more commonly used is a 60-30-10 ratio, where the accent colors are just a small splash. We don't need to get too mathematical here. It's more about the idea behind this line of thinking than any specific set of numbers. You just want to make sure you start with 1 or 2 anchor colors that take up the most visual space in the room and set the overall tone. Then add your secondary colors, repeating them around the room to help guide your eye through the space. And lastly, add your accent colors, pops of contrast that help to keep the space interesting and stimulating. Accent colors are like spice in food. Just a dash can go a long way, but without it, you're left with something a little too bland. To help make this theory a little more clear, let's look at some professionally designed spaces again and decode what's going on. In this bedroom, the color taking up the most space is this soft, beautiful blue. I'd also include this creamy off-white as a dominant color too, because the ceiling seems to be in that family as well, despite it being cut off in this picture. So let's call these our dominant colors. Next, my eye is drawn to this deep shade of purple. There's not a lot of it in the room, but that headboard is big and it takes up a lot of visual space, so to me it reads as a secondary color. We see it also repeated here in the stripes of this bench. Lastly, the accent color is very clearly red and used so tastefully in the Roman shades, pillows, and again on this bench. This room has a palette that's a little more obvious. This stunning mustardy yellow is obviously the first thing you notice, along with the cream on the ceiling and the bed linens, so I'd call those the dominant colors. The secondary color seems to be limited to blue, seen both on the bed linens and a very distinct shade of it in the bedhead. What's probably most interesting here is the accent colors. The spines of these books are an amazing array of colors, almost like a rainbow up against an otherwise nearly monochromatic space. There's a lot of different shades of accent colors here, but it's used so sparingly that it works. Suddenly, that rattan side table works up against a blue metal bedhead because each piece, though different in material, is part of a defined color palette. The color thread becomes the bridge between all the different styles, eras, and patterns. Once you've mastered color as your common thread, you can start layering in other unifying elements like texture. You could weave a thread of soft, cozy textures like velvet, wool, and faux fur throughout the room. Or you could focus on a thread of natural textures like jute, stone, and raw wood to create an earthy, cohesive feel. You can also use shape as a common thread. Going back to this yellow bedroom, you can see that the side table and bedhead share a similar shape. Their rounded, curved corners help tie them together despite being from 2 starkly different worlds. Maybe you create a theme of circles and curves using an arched mirror, a round coffee table, and a light fixture with a globe shape. This could create a gentle, subconscious flow that feels incredibly put together. But for now, if talking about form and materials is starting to get a little too overwhelming, just focus on color. It's the single most powerful tool you have for turning a chaotic space into a beautifully curated, eclectic home. By starting with one piece you love, pulling a simple color palette from it, and intentionally weaving those colors throughout your room, you give your collection a reason to be together, and you give your home a soul. And if you have any questions or other takes on things I've discussed, leave us a comment below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.